You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech Podcast, and I have Dr. John Peever. He's a professor at the University of Toronto in the area of systems and cell biology. He also is a VP of research at the Canadian Sleep Society, and we're going to be talking about the neurobiology of sleep disorders, etc., and what happens with REM sleep, narcolepsy, and a few more sleep issues. So, John, thanks for coming. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So, quick definition, what is neurobiology for people that don't know?
Neurobiology is a scientific way for understanding how the brain creates behaviors. So how, different parts of the brain cause different behaviors. So in the case of what we're going to talk about today is what parts of the brain get you to go to sleep and what parts of the brain get you to wake up. And, that would be the best way to think about neurobiology.
Yeah, and sleep seems to be very mental. For instance, if you're laying there trying to go to sleep, it seems to be counterproductive. And, sleep seems to be like, all of a sudden you're asleep. You don't know exactly when you fell asleep. And the next thing you know, you're awake if things go well. So I guess mentally it's interesting to see what happens. So do you have any insight into that? What happens when you lay down in the bed and, what stages you go through until the moment you fall asleep mentally?
Well, I think the way that the way I think about how we fall asleep is, really in the context of your audience. The best way to think about it really is that if you divided the brain into sort of two systems, one is the group of cells in different parts of the brain that keep you awake and alert, and then there's a whole other system that people don't necessarily ever think about, and that's the part of the brain that actually causes you to go to sleep. And those, it's the push and pull between those two systems that keeps you either awake or asleep. And as you're falling asleep, you can think of it as the waking side of the brain is slowing down and the sleep side of the brain is speeding up until you get to that critical point where the wake side is actually stopped and it's the sleep side of the brain that's in full tilt. And when I mean sides, I don't mean left and right. I'm just conceptually talking about the fact that there are systems in the brain, cells, connections between them that keep you awake, and then there are equally a whole system of cells that get you to go into sleep.
So falling asleep is a transition from, it may not even be an area, but a certain functioning of the brain to another set of functioning. And I guess that takes time.
Yeah. There's no one part of the brain that causes you to be awake, and there's no one part of the brain that causes you to be asleep. But it's that sort of delicate balance between those two brain functions, the waking function and the sleeping system that it's where you're in that sort of, as we say, no man's land when you're sort of half awake and half asleep. It's those two systems are kind of operating at the same time almost.
So what's been your particular focus of research as it pertains to sleep? What are you looking at?
Well, in my lab at the University of Toronto, we're really focused on REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep, or it's also called dreaming sleep. And what we're most interested in is really understanding what parts of the brain actually push you into this stage of sleep. So some of your listeners may be aware, and others may not, that there isn't just one type of sleep. There's actually two types of sleep. So one is slow wave sleep, or it's called non-rapid eye movement, or deep sleep. And then the second stage, which my lab is interested in, is that really remarkable stage of sleep where you're dreaming, and hence called dreaming sleep. And your brain is remarkably awake-like. when you're dreaming. And if you record different parts of the brain, they actually look more awake than they do when you're in deep or non-REM sleep. So that stage of dreaming sleep is what we're really interested in, simply because it's a remarkable stage where the brain is extremely active. And from sort of an energy standpoint, your brain is actually using almost as much energy when you're in dreaming sleep as when you're in alert waking. And, the fact that your brain is sort of offline, but it's so busy at the same time is what made us very curious as to why would the brain be so busy when you seem to be doing nothing during this stage of sleep.
Well, I guess I've heard, it's consolidating memories and learning and things like that. I mean, what's your insight into why it would be so busy?
Well, I think it's a really important question. I mean, I think one of the areas that we're really starting to gain some insight in is there's a system in the brain that is actually kind of like little tiny rivers, and those rivers flow out from the inside of the brain to the outside of the brain, and they actually remove waste from the brain. And so during the day, you can sort of think of your brain as, producing a lot of waste through from being very busy and thinking and doing things. And then when you go to sleep, one of the new ideas in the field is that the brain is actually one function of sleep is to get rid of that waste that you produce while you're awake. And that's what is actually going on during the brain during sleep. And this is an area it's really just in its infancy, but think it provides a critical insight into what the brain might be doing during sleep. Another area of research that's just come out in the last week or so is that during sleep, your DNA in your brain cells actually might be being repaired. So the damage done during the day might be being repaired during sleep.
So I guess at night, it's like New York City, the garbage trucks come in and pick up all the garbage people threw out on the curbs and take it away. It's the same thing with the brain.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. One of the ideas is that, you can use another analogy is that during the day the roads are really, really busy and all the use from all the cars passing down those roads causes damage to the roads, and you can't really repair them when it's a busy traffic hour. So a lot of road work happens at night when things are quiet. And so that analogy is sort of like the brain. So the cells in the brain are very busy during the day, keeping you awake and alert and doing all the things that allow you to live your life. But at night, some of those pathways and cells slow down. And the idea is that this might be an opportune time to repair them.
So what order do things happen when you first fall asleep? And does that order just repeat multiple times through sleep cycles? Like, what are the stages and what order do they come in?
Well, as we discussed earlier, there are in fact multiple stages of sleep. I think in the context of this conversation, we should just keep them that there are two primary types of sleep. So that slow wave or non-REM sleep and then REM sleep. There's in fact various levels of each of those if you want to subcategorize them. But you used an important term, which was sleep cycle. So you just don't put your head on your pillow and then go boom in and have a random mixture of non-REM and REM sleep. You actually go through a very characteristic cycle where you enter into light sleep and then it becomes slightly deeper and then you enter into slow wave sleep. Then you emerge back into almost a waking state and then you plunge back into sleep. And then this cycle repeats over the course of the night so that you get the normal stages of sleep that you have. But I think one of the important ideas in the field is that the beginning of the night is really populated, or slow wave sleep is the predominant type of sleep. And so it's often thought that if sleep is really serving a recuperative process, and because slow wave sleep is happening early in the night, it seems like that slow wave or deep sleep might be the most restorative sleep. And a lot of evidence seems to suggest that it will in fact be the case.
Well, what's happening in each stage? When is the cleanup happening?
Well, I think that's actually a very difficult question to answer because you have to really look at a whole range of body functions. So certainly in the brain, we'll just focus on that, I think would be the most useful, is the way we can tell whether a person's in deep sleep or in slow wave sleep and REM sleep is the brain produces very clear signatures of electrical activity. And those signatures stem from a coordinated effort of different parts of the brain, different cells in different parts of the brain that are having conversations in a very specific way to produce those signature electrical activity, or brain waves as we often refer to them, that you can measure. So if you were to record someone, the activity of the brain looks very different. The electrical activity of the brain, or brain waves, looks very different during deep sleep or slow wave sleep than it does, for example, during REM sleep. And so we can certainly look at that type of activity to see what's going on, at least in the brain. We certainly know that during REM sleep, the sleep stage that we study, it's a remarkable phase because a lot of things are going on in the body. So REM sleep is called rapid eye movement sleep because the eyes are moving back and forth. So I'm sure if you've ever had a dog or a cat or a baby or slept beside someone, you can often tell when someone's in dreaming or REM sleep because their eyes are moving back and forth. And the other curious thing they do is they seem to have these tiny little twitches. So even though the muscles of the body during REM sleep are effectively paralyzed, the muscles of the hands and legs and eyes and lots of different parts of the musculature of the body actually will engage in these tiny little twitches. The same, one of the other things that happens during sleep is that blood pressure changes remarkably between different sleep states. So in slow wave sleep, blood pressure is very low and steady, but as soon as you enter from slow wave sleep into dreaming or REM sleep, blood pressure can increase and it can fluctuate, and those fluctuations are often coincident with those muscle twitches that I just described.
So again, what is the order? Does REM happen before deep sleep or after? What's the order of the stages?
So REM is actually extremely tidy sleep state in that when you fall asleep at the beginning of the night, you spend about 90 minutes in slow wave or deep sleep. And it's not until 90 minutes after you've been asleep that you have the first cycle of REM sleep. And that first cycle of REM sleep is relatively short. And then after that short REM cycle of REM sleep is over, you enter back into deep sleep or slow wave sleep again. And then at another defined period later, it varies between people. It can be about an hour. You'll have another episode of REM sleep, and it's a little bit longer than the first. And then you'll go back into slow wave sleep, and then you'll have another episode of REM, and it's a little bit longer than the first episode. So REM sleep is really interesting in that it doesn't happen at the beginning of the night, at least in healthy people. Although changes in the timing of when REM sleep occurs is actually an index of if someone's has a certain sleep disorder, but it's very tidy in that it starts at about 90 minutes after you fall asleep, and then each cycle that occurs of REM sleep after gets a little bit longer, and then you end your night, in fact, in REM sleep.
So we don't know when the shrinkage of the brain tissues, and the cleanup of the brain occurs. Like, has it been observed all throughout sleep or only at certain parts?
Well, no, we haven't been able to. Technically, that's a very difficult thing to do, to measure the way the brain gets rid of this waste. So at the moment, most of the research is, in fact, it's only been done in animals, and it's been using techniques that are very hard to do when an animal is behaving normally. So most of it's been done under using anesthesia, and different anesthetics can actually produce brain activity that looks and body activity that looks like slow wave or deep sleep. So it's simply been inferred, in fact, at this point, that the brain is cleaning waste up during sleep. But there's good evidence that it's certainly happening during sleep, but what stage of sleep, as you point out, is really unclear at the moment.
So is there evidence that the brain does this, or you said it's inferred?
Well, part of it is inferred, and part of it is there's evidence to demonstrate that it's happening in sleep. But as I said, it's not clear what type of sleep it's happening in. It's only been looked at broadly across an entire evening, and so whether the waste removal is happening during slow wave or deep sleep or REM sleep is really it's unsure. But it's certainly happening during sleep. But it's been difficult with the technical limitations that we have before us to determine what type of sleep it's occurring in. If I had to give a guess, I think it would be happening during both types of sleep. So the deep sleep is when things are calm, cool, and quiet. But as I mentioned before, REM sleep is really quite interesting because the brain becomes very busy, blood pressure changes, blood flow changes, energy changes. So, it's probably the conversation between non-REM sleep or deep sleep and REM sleep that allows the effective removal of the waste. And so rather than thinking that it's just happening during one type of sleep, it's probably the continuity between the occurrence of the different types of sleep that allow the effective removal.
It seems like what's happening, is just speculation and not even scientific language, but it seems like what's happening is the brain is, it seems like a gigantic ship or something. It's being tested. The systems are turning on and off. Garbage is being cleared away. Everything's being prepped, I guess, for the next day. It seems like maybe that's why the brain goes through these cycles. There's a cleaning period, then there's like, okay, let's run the brain and test it and see what's going on, make sure everything's good. Then we clean some more, then we run it some more. That's just my feeling I get when you talk about this cycle.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think is important is that you develop some ideas based on information that you heard, and I think really that's what scientists do as well. I mean, it's really quite intuitive that sleep is important and that sleep is probably restoring some damage that's been done to the brain and to the body, I might add, during the day. So, there's a lot of evidence to suggest, for example, that the immune system might itself be repaired during sleep, and that, as you navigate through your day, your immune system gets tired, if you will, and it needs to rest. So there's lots of evidence certainly to suggest that sleep is restorative in nature. The questions are really what's being restored, but from my perspective is how it's being restored is really the critical question. I think the consensus in science, and it's intuitive. That a good night of sleep cures everything. The Irish have a fantastic proverb that goes, "There's nothing that a good laugh and a good night of sleep can't cure." Even Aristotle, over 2,000 years ago, remarked on the benefits of sleep. So I think we've come to an idea that there's no doubt that sleep is beneficial, but a scientist's job is to really try and understand what the specific benefit is, and more importantly, how are those benefits that occur during sleep occurring. So you had mentioned memory, and that sleep is good for memory. Many of my colleagues spend an enormous amount of time trying to understand how sleep makes memory better, because we know that a few nights of bad sleep or even a few hours of bad sleep can impair your ability to remember what you learned the day before. And conversely, you don't perform as well on various tasks that you have to do during the day when you're really tired. But the question as a scientist is, how does that actually happen? So a lot of people are really rigorously studying how cells in the brain put memories together, and how sleep impacts the ability of those cells in the brain to put those memories together.
Well, how have you, I've just been talking about the brain. I would think the entire body, every cell in your body goes through stages and cycles as you sleep, not just your brain cells. Is there evidence for that? Have people observed, what's the kidney doing? What are skin cells doing? What are other organs doing while you're sleeping?
Yeah, and this is an incredibly important question, and one that I feel is underrepresented in the current in some of the current research going on in the field of sleep. So a colleague of mine, about 20 years ago, wrote an article that was titled "Sleep is of the brain, by the brain, and for the brain." And I think the title of that article is quite misleading. There's no doubt that sleep, that your brain is generating the behavior of sleep. But as you point out, there's also no doubt, at least from some of our own evidence in my lab, that the body itself benefits from sleep. So, for example, one of the first things that most people will notice if you watch someone fall asleep is what happens. Their eyes get heavy, and if they're sitting, for example, in the airplane, you probably all watch someone falling asleep on the plane, their head drops down. What's happening is that as you enter into sleep, the muscles of your body themselves relax. And that's one of the critical elements of sleep, is that the muscles that you use during wakefulness relax when you sleep. And so some of our work has really, gone against the idea that sleep is of the brain, by the brain, and just for the brain, but is looking at the benefits of sleep for the body. And so we find that, muscle cells, for example, if they've been damaged during the day, and then you don't have a good night of sleep, that those cells don't have the same capacity to repair themselves. And so, there's no doubt that sleep is also for the body, but as you point out, you asked about the kidneys, for example. Very little information about how does kidney function itself differ from the day versus the night. And I think this is really one of the futures in sleep, is to continue to recognize that sleep is really important for the brain, but also to really start probing and asking questions about how is sleep beneficial for the body, and what are some of the benefits that a good night of sleep allows you to have.
Yeah, I wondered how light, being exposed to light at different parts of your sleep cycle affects you. And, not just the eyes, but it just seems like the entire body has light sensors. And this is just anecdotal from, my sleep, but it seems like, covering the eyes helps if it's bright outside or bright in the room. But, being in a dark room works better for some reason. So again, I'm just guessing, but it seems like the entire body, or big parts of the body, have light sensors that can affect your sleep.
Oh, that's very clear that light has an enormous impact on the sort of the rhythms of sleep and wakefulness. So, I mean, there are 2 times of the year where, we change the clock ahead and back. And for a lot of people, the change in the light rhythm has a very significant impact on your ability to, for example, fall asleep. So if you're trying to fall asleep in a bright room, the light is actually trying to keep your brain awake. And dark is definitely associated with, at least in humans, promoting sleep. Of course, bear in mind some animals sleep in the light. But I think there isn't any doubt that light plays a major role in sort of consolidating the rhythm of sleep into a day and a night cycle, and that trying to promote light during the day is very useful in staying awake, and dark during the night, again, is very useful at helping promote sleep.
Any experimentation of people being in darkness the entire time they sleep, or people being exposed to light, during their sleep period, or sleeping late and, like let's say you go to bed at 3 or 4 in the morning and you get up at noon, it's almost impossible to not have more light than someone else that would sleep from midnight to 8, let's say, entering the room. And I wonder what that does to your sleep.
Yeah, one of I'll sort of give a slightly different answer to that question. And one of the things that has become extremely concerning, still in the same vein as the question, is the use of cell phones, and computer screens and tablets. So a lot of people have started to routinely, if they wake up in the middle of the night, they're curious about, well, what time is it, or maybe they're checking their email for some reason if they have an important email. And it's not just the light itself, but particular wavelengths of light that seem to be particularly stimulatory, or specific wavelengths of light actually wake the brain up more than others. And so, using tablets and cell phones, it provides the brain a sort of a new unpatterned source of light. So the human brain is really quite adept at experiencing the context of light during the day and dark during the night. And the introduction of technologies through smartphones and computers has really been messing around with when the brain sees light, and we know that light has a profound effect on interrupting sleep. You alluded to people who are shift working, perhaps, where they're trying to sleep until noon because perhaps they worked all night. I mean, there are sort of 2 competing issues there. One is the light that is associated with the day when they're sleeping, but the brain has a built-in clock, if you will, that sort of ticks away, and it's really hard to change the timing of that clock. And so you're trying to work when your brain is naturally asleep. You can certainly do it, but it's really difficult because you've got the competing issues of light during the day when you're trying to sleep, and then you have this clock that's saying, well, you shouldn't be sleeping now, you should be awake. And this is another really important area in science and medicine, is understanding how shift work is impacting human health. Because we know that sleep can't just move all over the place. You just don't get to sleep when you'd like to because of that clock, that built-in brain clock. And trying to sleep at the wrong time of the day may not be as beneficial, actually, as sleeping at the right time of the day.
Yeah, I mean, like for instance, I've been going to sleep at 3 or 4 for 20 years, and I get up at like 11 or noon, and it's just my schedule. And when I go on vacation, I'll go to bed earlier and get up earlier, and it feels pretty good. But I slip back, and I just wonder, I don't know, I don't know if I should just say, oh, it's my chronotype, I can't help it, but it just seems like I'm pulled towards doing that. And other people are like, oh my God, that's horrible, but
Yeah, see,
people have
I'm
different
I'm like
chronotypes.
you. I'm on
I
the
just wonder.
opposite end. I'm wide awake at 4:35 in the morning. I'm ready to go, but by 9 p.m. I have some pretty hard brain fog. So and genetically, people there's really solid evidence to suggest that people sort of have a genetic predisposition to be an early bird or a night owl. And so there is really good difference. I mean, it's shiftable. You can move it around, but the propensity or your brain seems to, for whatever reason, work best early in the morning or late in the evening. And it's best if you can work around what works best for you. But unfortunately, sometimes when you have to be at work at 8 a.m., but you are not a morning person, it really is tough on people.
Yeah, definitely. But it's almost at the point where I could call you and say, "Hey, I'm going to bed. You take over, and you get up."
That's actually how modern society works, luckily. So, it's like in the ER, you've got, shift 1 and shift 2, and it's good when shift 2 comes on because shift 1's pretty tired. But it would be kind of cool if we could do share through brain connectivity that ability.
So what's we've been going all over the place, but in REM sleep, you said you've been studying it quite a bit. What interesting things have you figured out about REM sleep that aren't just maybe commonly known? What kind of intricacies have you seen?
So one of we're sort of interested not just in how the brain generates healthy, normal REM sleep. We're interested in that question because there are 2 primary sleep disorders that result from a breakdown in the circuits or the brain parts that get you to go to normal REM sleep. And those 2 sleep disorders are narcolepsy, and the other is REM sleep behavior disorder. So narcolepsy is many people will think of narcolepsy as being the sleep disorder where you're persistently sleepy, and that is sort of the most commonly known symptom of narcolepsy is someone who's just chronically sleepy. And we're not talking a little bit sleepy. We're talking the type of sleepiness you'd experience if you'd been awake for 2 solid days sleepy. So people with narcolepsy, we think that the parts of their brain that generate healthy REM sleep actually seem to misfire, and they may actually appear during wakefulness. So, part of the concept would be that the sleepiness that people with narcolepsy experiences is the parts of the brain that are generating REM sleep coming online at the wrong time. So what my group has really been doing is looking not at that part actually, but the other thing that people with narcolepsy experience is a symptom called cataplexy, and that's where you're awake, but all of a sudden your muscles simply fall asleep. So people with narcolepsy have the symptom of cataplexy, and they'll be doing an activity, and the next thing they know, they have this episode of cataplexy. Their muscles all relax, and they slump over, and they're unable to move. They're not asleep, they're awake. And why I bring this up is that it's our idea that the part of the brain that causes your muscles to relax during REM sleep switches on while you're awake and causes cataplexy.
How long does the cataplexy last? Hopefully not more than a second. Otherwise, it'll be horrible to be paralyzed multiple times a day, every day.
Cataplexy can last from seconds to minutes. So if some people will have hundreds of episodes a day where they can last from, anywhere between 3 seconds to a minute. And, that's a very extreme scenario. And then for really remarkable reasons, some people may only experience cataplexy, people with narcolepsy may experience it, once a year. But when people with cataplexy, when people experience cataplexy, it's extraordinarily debilitating. For example, you wouldn't want a brain surgeon experiencing an episode of cataplexy in the middle of surgery, or you wouldn't want your kid's school bus driver to have an episode of cataplexy while driving a bus. So as you point out, it's really quite a devastating symptom when it occurs, because the completely stops ongoing normal behaviors, and you can either just feel extraordinarily weak and unable to move, or you can physically collapse onto the ground.
Yeah, and it's sad because, everyone makes fun of people with narcolepsy, or, culturally it's seen as like, I don't know, the people are not getting enough sleep, or, they're kind of, I guess they're kind of laughed at, but it's a really serious thing, it sounds like.
Yeah, there's I've spoken to many people with narcolepsy, and there's the normal range of responses. Some people are very empathetic to the disorder and to the symptoms, but a lot of people, you talk to with narcolepsy, people will say, "Come on, you're just lazy. You're just not trying hard enough." And I think what I had, I'm not sure if it helps, but I explain to people who don't understand narcolepsy that people with narcolepsy, they lose a specific cell in their brain that causes this disorder. And so we're talking about, degeneration of a very specific group of cells in the brain that cause this disorder. So we can take, for example, in my lab, we can genetically engineer a mouse so it can express those cells that are lost in narcolepsy. And that very same mouse will all of a sudden develop all the symptoms of narcolepsy. So I think what's important to recognize is that, number one, we've identified what causes narcolepsy, and it's a real tangible change in the structure of the brain and a specific group of cells. And that I think when people understand that, they have a lot more empathy and understanding for people living with narcolepsy, that it isn't just a disorder or a condition of, lazy, sleepy people, that it's a real tangible brain disorder.
Yeah. Well, all right. So in addition to narcolepsy, again, what kind of REM disorders or what kind of interesting facts have you learned about REM sleep?
So I think although our work looking at how REM sleep and narcolepsy and cataplexy are related, the work we're really pushing forward with now is, I think, going to be in the future extremely important, because what my clinical colleagues have found is that people with a disorder called REM sleep behavior disorder, and this is a condition that's kind of the opposite of cataplexy. It's when you're in dreaming sleep or REM sleep, your muscles are normally paralyzed. But in people with REM sleep behavior disorder, that lack of muscle paralysis is erased. And that might sound trivial, but it's not, because it allows the dreaming brain to become active and to move your body. And so what people with REM sleep behavior disorder experiences is dream enactment. And it's usually extremely violent, to the point that the most common reason for being diagnosed with REM sleep disorder is visit to the emergency room, because you either punch the person you're sleeping beside so hard that you broke their jaw, or that you threw yourself out of bed and through a closet door, for example. Those are common scenarios in people with REM sleep behavior disorder. While dream enactment is kind of scary and it gets you to the hospital, the really concerning element clinically is that virtually all those people will eventually develop a brain degenerative disorder, with Parkinson's being the most common. So virtually 100% of people with REM sleep behavior disorder will at some point develop a neurodegenerative disorder like Parkinson's disease or Lewy bodies with dementia. So why I think this is so important is what it's telling us is that the changes in REM sleep are the very first symptom of ensuing brain degeneration that underlies, for example, Parkinson's and dementia. And so we view this as going to be the best predictor for who will develop a degenerative disease in the future.
Okay, very interesting. What is I've heard of alpha wave intrusion. What is that?
Alpha waves are a type of brain wave that is a fast frequency brain wave that we associate with occurring during wakefulness. And so the very activated, busy brain, so you're driving down a busy freeway, there's lots of things going on. You have lots of alpha waves in your brain because your brain's busy paying attention. I'm pretty sure where you wanted to chat about is that some people have high alpha waves who have insomnia. And so even though the brain is asleep, there's still a lot of alpha wave activity going on in the brain, and it's thought that sort of the busy brain of during wakefulness kind of creeps into the brain that's trying to get to sleep. And so the presence of those alpha waves is sort of keeping you awake, if you will.
Okay, got it. So what's next for the research in REM sleep? What are you looking at right now, and what are you hoping to figure out in the next year?
So as I mentioned, we're really interested in the relationship between REM sleep and future degeneration. So what we're working on is trying to figure out why are the parts of the brain that cause REM sleep so vulnerable to the degenerative process that underlies, for example, Parkinson's disease, because those cells that are associated with REM sleep seem to die off, and then you move while you're in REM sleep. It means that there's something about those cells that make them vulnerable. And if we can understand what makes those particular cells so vulnerable to degeneration, we might be able to, number one, stop that process from killing those particular cells, but even more likely from invading and killing other cells in the brain that are associated with the cognitive changes in Parkinson's and the dementias.
Okay. Well, very good. So what's the best way for folks to learn more about your work and maybe get in contact for collaboration?
You can go to www.peeverlab.com.
Okay, and how do you spell Peever? It's Peever?
Peever.
Okay. Well, very good.
Great.
Well, John, thanks for coming on the podcast, and it's been really interesting. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.